Hi everyone, thank you for joining Ashley's Better Back to School Nutrition Simplified webinar with special guest Judy, Converse RD. Judy is a registered dietitian specializing in medical nutrition therapies for children with developmental, growth, learning, behavior, and allergy issues. We're very excited to have her on the webinar today. There will be a Q&A, at the end of the webinar. So if you think of any questions, points that come up while the webinar is going on, if you write them in the chat box at the bottom of the control panel, I'll read them out to Ashley and Judy at the end of the webinar and get them answered for you. Also, there's going to be 5 random lucky winners chosen who will receive some goodies from Nature's Path, one of our sponsors. So at the end of the webinar, I will call out the names and then I will contact you via email to get your address and get the goodies sent to you. And finally, I know a lot of people love coming back to these webinars, want to read a certain point or listen to another point or share them with friends. So this will be up on Ashley's Facebook or on her YouTube channel within the week. So if you check out her Facebook or YouTube channel within the next week or so, you'll be able to find it there. So let's get this webinar started. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Matt. If you're like me, you're in that moment right now where you're like, back to what? I literally feel like I was just talking about spring health and getting ready for summer, and it's like all of a sudden it's back to school. And I was working on something the other night at about 10:45 at night, and I had to stop myself. First of all, what I was working on was actually cleanses for January and the new year because that's what the media is working on right now, and nutrition ideas that in the new year. And I also realized it was 10:45 and I was still working, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I call this period in August the calm before the storm. For many of you, it may already feel like the storm because kids go back to school early, but this is what's going on right now is really multifactorial. And I'm so excited to bring you this webinar today because when we think of back to school nutrition and when we hear about the tips around back to school nutrition, a lot of it has to do with what to do for your kids and how to optimize their nutrition, and that is really important. But if we do not think about you and your health, I promise you, as the year goes on, they are not going to be at their best or have a better year because we need you to be in that space. So this webinar is really for both of you. And one of the things that can be the hardest during this time period is navigating not just the new year, new class, new schedule, but some of the things that may have been existing before. If your child has trouble with focus or attention, or may have food allergies or intolerances, or is dealing with a medical issue, and how you continue to be able to deal with that through the year, a lot of the outcomes deal with are a result of how well the year starts off. So I'm just thrilled to have a colleague of mine, Judy, Converse with me, and she will be joining me in the middle of this webinar and then through the rest of it. So without further ado, let's get started. Very clearly the subtitle here, I hope that you're all on board with better nutrition does fuel a better year. But the important thing is it's that better year for all. And that is really what we're going to dive into. And I could not be more grateful to the people that helped me fuel my better year. In fact, I just had a Manitoba Harvest hemp smoothie while I was on the phone dealing with fraud, but that's a whole other story. I probably need a lot of natural calm, that magnesium, to help make sure that my stress doesn't hit levels 9 or 10. We're going to talk about that. I'm definitely detoxing part of my summer vacation, so I'm eating plenty of broccoli, but I also am drinking right now. I made some iced tea from my True Brock. And in my smoothie, I had organic fruit, and I had a smoothie blend that I keep in the freezer. Freezer is one of my absolute favorite places for ensuring better nutrition, from Earthbound Farm, the organic smoothie kit. And then I always love to add some crunch in there with some of my favorite organic cereals from Nature's Path. And in fact, one of my favorite recipes for back to school for kids and parents is making overnight oats. And parents, I think you might love this one. I put a shot of espresso in my overnight oats, and I make sure that I have a different color mason jar than anybody else's, because I don't want anyone getting the shot of espresso. But anyway, just wanted to show how easy and relevant my partners and sponsors are, and you'll be hearing more about them as we go through this. So onwards. So we're going to talk today about, it is not just about them. I love your kids. I love your focus and that they are you want them to have the best year, but you have to have a great year and be healthy in order for them to. So what we're actually going to talk about is what do we all actually need? And then I'm going to go into a couple of my strategies, and that's where I'm going to bring in Judy. She's just got some really excellent tips and some ways of dealing coming from her experience with her patients that are going to be really helpful for us. And then some resources so you know where to turn, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So let's move on. So a lot of times these people here are kids. We want them to have the smiles. We want them to be happy. We want them to be alert. We want them to have the greatest day ever. But if it leaves us feeling like this, either confused or stressed or irritated or frustrated, at the end, as the year goes on, that plays out over here. So I want us to remember that what's good for the gander, good for the goose. And we need to make sure that as we move forward that we're focusing on options that help everybody. The other key one is that I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of better. So, you know, sometimes I hear the expression having my best year, and it's not about my best year. It's really about making sure that everyone has better, and that certainly begins with better nutrition. So what absolutely every one of us needs is better nutrition, because we know what better nutrition isn't, and we know better nutrition fuels better health. That's the mecca. That's what we all want. And in this particular case, better nutrition fuels a better back to school. But the key thing with that better part, and I'm going to keep harping on it, is it's really that what also fuels a better school year for everyone. So better nutrition, if you've listened to any of my other webinars, you know it's what goes in and on you that either enables better health or deducts from health. So as we think about the school year, and when we think about all of our better back to school supplies, which we'll get into in the future in this webinar, we're going to be thinking about all of the things that go in and on you. And remember, if you listen, for example, to the Better Beauty webinar, or I hope that you all will join us next month for the Better Clothing and Bedding, it is so important for us to understand that, especially for our young children, but also for us, and especially if we're dealing with any health issues, what goes on our bodies is going directly in our bodies. Actually, without the vetting system of our digestive system, and that's a really important thing for us to remember to understand what is going to be has the potential to negatively impact our health. The other one, you may have listened to my Better Supplements webinar. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's really important to be thinking about total nutrition today. And when it comes to kids, one of the things that I think is so critical about total nutrition is that there's a lot of food that is fortified. An environmental working group actually did a report that I helped with the media and evaluation around a year or two ago, looking at the fortification in cereals. Some were kid cereals, some were adult cereals. But when you looked at the portion size that your child was getting, it could be, and that was if you were just having one serving, your child could be exceeding their daily value for nutrients, not from the food, but from what those foods were fortified with. So the cereal might be fortified with B12 or vitamin D or vitamin C, things that sound great for us, but we're getting too much of them in the cereal. And when we look at those things, that if they're fat soluble vitamins, or if they're minerals and they're not ones that are going to be easily excreted, that can actually create or be a part of creating health problems. So one of the things that we'll talk about is really paying attention to what total nutrition looks like. So hope everyone is familiar with this. If not, I just wanted to do a quick run through and make sure that you remember, first of all, it's free on my website. This is reminding you that everything that you need to know about nutrition does actually fit on one page. Now remember, this is called the Better Nutrition Simplified Plan, not the Perfect Nutrition. If you want the Perfect Nutrition class, I've got a bridge to sell you. There is no such thing as perfect nutrition. There is no such thing as perfect health. And likely, if you're dealing with back to school right now, you're keenly aware of the fact that there's just no such thing as perfect in child rearing, raising, etc. So what I want us to remember is one of the ways that we can assess if we're getting better nutrition is by doing a food journal, and I have the kids do this. I think it's really important. My kid clients, my adult clients, everybody does this for 3 days. And the 3 days that we pick are a day that is kind of normal. There is no such thing as one normal day or one set day. And then a day that maybe there's a day where they have like an after school sport and also a music class, or they have a day where they stay at an after school program, or they have a day where they don't go to school and they homeschool, so that impacts what you're doing, or whatever it is. But it's an abnormal, what we'll call quote unquote work day, or an abnormal school day. And then the third one is the non-work day, and that's typically a weekend. But I have you do the nutrition journal for this and fill out what you're having to eat, when, and what you're having to drink. And this is such a great exercise to do with your kids. It's not more homework, but you can decide to give them a sticker, or you can make it contingent on their ability to do something. I try not to use food as a reward, so I would prefer that you don't use that part. But what you can do in that part is you can start to see trends, because at your age, at our age, I want to remind you, none of us, I still have yet to meet a total health hot mess, but I promise you that your kids are not health hot messes. And what I mean by that is nobody's doing all of this wrong. So what we want to figure out are when in those different days, what are the things that we struggle with the most? Is it too much of something, too little of something? Is it a quantity related? Is it the quality? Hey, when they're at school all day and going to other people's houses or programs, I just can't control the quality and it's awful. The balance, the nutrient balance, I send them to school with all carbohydrates because the proteins go bad, or whatever it is on that part. Or the frequency, are we just not getting in enough pit stops? And another one under nutrient balance I want to remind us are the non-starchy vegetables. So that your journal is going to help us to highlight that, and that's going to be a really great tool. And why do we focus on better nutrition? Well, better nutrition, we know that it fuels better health. So we know that part, and I'm going to explain how some of the selections and of those 4 pillars that I was just talking about, how they directly impact this. It also impacts better energy, and when we have better energy, we perform better in school, but we also perform better at home, and that's the gift to you, parents. It also has to do, as a result, with better performance, and then certainly better focus, and we'll talk to Judy about that. So the first place I want to talk about is better health. When we look at the studies around who is going to be the population that is most impacted by pesticide residues and chemicals, artificial ingredients, it is our children. It's certainly all the way from prenatal, all the way through birth and into childhood. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, the body is forming during this time. And we know that it's like building a house. And we know that if you build in a shaky house or a house on poor ingredients, it's going to need a heck of a lot of more repairs in the future. And it's likely to be, it's probably not going to do as well when the storm happens, or when the termites decide to come, and whatever it is that hits. So we're talking about building a foundation, but we're also just talking about square inches. And what I mean on that part is the exposure. So if I have a coin size of a pesticide residue in terms of quantity, if my square footage or my square inches is the size of your kitchen floor, that's going to be very different than if that square footage or those square inches are the size of the top of your stove. And what I mean by that is that kids they're smaller, and so the impact of those chemicals are so much more significant. So what we want to do is, we're not going to choose, perfect would be to have everything be USDA organic, and then it would also to be for USDA organic to be perfect all the time, and that's not the case. But what we want to pay attention to is whether we're eating, or we're taking supplements, or we're rubbing creams on, or whatever we're washing with. We want to focus on eating real food, giving the body what it recognizes, and avoiding chemistry lab projects. And so if we go back here, you'll see under quality, that's what I'm talking about. And this gives you some guidelines in terms of what we want to look for. So that's one of the things that you want to think about. Now, I have parents who say to me, Ashley, it's totally unrealistic. I can't control everything. I said, first of all, I don't want you to control. You have the ability to influence, because you're purchasing a lot of the food depending on the age of the child and where the kids are getting food. But the other part is, what I want you to start off thinking about is what goes in or on their bodies most often. And then I want to think about what goes in and on your body most often. And you might even do a list. Again, these are fun projects to do with the kids and to say like, okay, if you, during the school year, if you have cereal every single morning, then I want that cereal to be organic. If you have cereal, sweet cereal as a treat on a Saturday, or if cereal is a snack that you take when you're hiking or you're going to a soccer game, and it's like not every day or even, less than once a week, I'm not going to worry about that, but I still want that cereal to not have chemistry lab projects in it. It just wouldn't necessarily need to be organic. So that's kind of the way that we want to think about things. And when we think about the quality piece, we always want to focus on better. The reason that we want to focus on better is life happens and we find ourselves not being able to choose between, do our kids get fuel or does our car get fuel? And there might be moments where we feel like, well, I'd be okay if the car ran out of fuel because my kids are so hangry right now, I've got to feed them. But the reality is you can't get where you're going if you don't have gas in the tank. And so it happens. I have people who tell me this all the time, and I smile at them and say, I can find in any gas station in any part of this country, I can find better quality options. And I do not expect you to be the superhero that always has something with you. I think that that can be a great idea, but I'm also not a big fan of keeping food tucked away in the car and is it in plastic bags and does it get heat, high heat and all this stuff. So what I want to remember is when we go into if we're in an airport, if we're in a gas station, any of these places, we want to look for that better quality option. And that may mean at times that an apple is not as good of a choice as something else that might be available that was organic. So for example, maybe there is an organic pear, maybe there's an organic cereal, and maybe the apple isn't. Because apple is on the Dirty Dozen list, I would prefer, and again, this is if we're always stopping and getting apples, I would prefer that we don't have the apple and we have the item that is organic. Now, what I don't want us to do, and that's going to come up later, is turn to the organic soda and say I'm going to have the organic soda instead of eating an apple because the soda was organic. We'll get into that as we move along. So the other thing, and this is really the one that I get the questions about, and hopefully this colorful slide set doesn't scare anyone off, but people are like, oh, how can I have better energy throughout the day? Well, the key thing is making sure that you understand the way that the body is designed. And the body is designed to produce energy from nutrients. And in particular, we get quick energy from carbohydrate and we get longer energy because it takes more digestion from proteins and fats, as well as from our non-starchy vegetables. So I want us to pay attention to that part. The other thing that we need to understand is the role of quantity. I am not going to tell you that you can't have a pie. And this pie is actually meant to be like the size of a palm. It could be the size of your palm, the size of your kid's palm. And that's one of the important things that we want to think about. My portion size is going to be different than a child's portion size, but I'll tell you, when it comes to eating pie, I sometimes feel like I wish I was Shaq, so I had like a bigger palm. We can have that, but if we're in the mood for quantity, we also want to recognize that there are some foods that we can eat a heck of a lot of. Like you can have 3/4 of a cup or a cup of strawberries, and that's going to be your serving of carbohydrate. And the reason that that's an important thing to understand is that we have different nutrition needs at times, but we also have different, what I'll call emotion or service needs even from our food. And sometimes we really do need to eat a lot. And when we need to eat a lot is not the time to start eating either chocolate for me or a cherry pie else. So our quantity is a great way to explain it to your kids, and for us to think about it is, it's like knowing that everybody has a gas tank, and if you put too much in your gas tank at once, it overflows, and there is no help there. The overflow is, there's nothing that excess can do, and in fact, that excess in our body just becomes fat or is dangerous in terms of taking up room or overwhelming the body, from what it needs to do. So that leads us to the partner to better quantity is better nutrient balance. And here's probably the biggest back to school problem that I see for parents and for kids. For parents, and I'll be curious, as Judy, as we get into Judy's conversation, I'm guaranteeing that she sees this too, because all dietitians, we end up talking about it, where There are, with kids in particular, it's so easy to give them carbohydrates. So, gosh, I just wish they would eat anything. Okay, they'll eat a banana or they'll eat a bread, or they'll do great with 2 slices of bread and some peanut butter. That would have a little bit of protein, so I would need to add a little blue in there. But what we're seeing is they're not getting sufficient protein and they're not getting non-starchy vegetables. So more than likely, this is bread with butter. And I have a lot of people that tell me, I just need to get something into the kids. And I'm with you on getting something in. But here's the problem. If you give them this, if this is the something that they get in, they get quick, get a little bit of lasting energy here, and then they bottom out. And the problem is also that 2 servings of carbohydrate, maybe it's okay for your child, but go upwards to 3, 4, they've got too much. The gas tank is overfilled. So what we want to work on are options of turning around and saying, so the solution here would be if I was doing bread and butter, or this was apple maybe, this was some apple slices, and there even wasn't the purple, then what I could do is a nut butter with those, for example. And I do those like nut butter sandwiches. I'll do peanut butter or cashew butter or almond butter with apple or with a great bread, or I'll do the oatmeal. I was mentioning Nature's Path oatmeal. And then instead of doing a butter, I'll do the hemp seeds on top. And the hemp seeds give me fat and protein. Now, I'd love to see us have the non-starchy vegetables at breakfast. And in fact, on my recipes, I have a great recipe for what I call Hulk pancakes or Hulk cakes. And they are, they're green, so that's really fun for the kids. It's actually fun for the kids and all of us adults too. I think that was a commercial once. But it's spinach, banana, and eggs. It's 2 eggs, 1 banana, and a ½ cup of frozen spinach. Put it in the blender, and instead of making that as a smoothie, you just put it into the pan and make it as pancake. I get it that many mornings don't feel like you have that opportunity to make it, but you could make it the night before and they do last and taste great the next day. So that's an easy way we could get a non-starchy vegetable in. I also have made mixed cauliflower and other vegetables into smoothies, and we have some fun recipes. Earthbound Farm has some great recipes on their site also for kid-friendly ways to get the vegetables in. We're not hiding them, we're just not making them we're not calling them out as the thing that someone is eating and focusing on eat your veggies at that moment. It's more eat your enjoyable, delicious meal that happens to have veggies in it. So on this one, it's more, it's the too much. And this is one that I find a lot of times from parents where I see us going a little bit overboard on the protein, the amount of protein. And this isn't so much on the kid side. And so I just want to remind you to make sure that you pay attention to the portion part and that you're not getting too much in terms of, because you're adding in the protein. So for example, this might be like the Cobb salad that has the egg, the cheese, the turkey, and too much, even if it's protein. I know we're on this protein kick right now, but even if it's protein, it's not going to be helpful or healthful. Another example here would have different colors would be that quote unquote perfect lunch that many parents, who are clients come to me and say, oh, I'm being really good. I had an unsweetened iced tea. I had a salad, bunch of non-starchy vegetables. I had a piece of chicken or a piece of fish on it. I skipped the croutons. I squeezed some lemon on it. And I was like, okay, so totally get that, like, you want me to high five you about your lunch. What happened at 3 o'clock? And at 3 o'clock, I had the mocha. I couldn't keep myself away from the candy bowl. My kids had cupcakes at school and I had one. They wanted to stop at the coffee shop, and instead of just getting a coffee, we got a cookie. So the point about the nutrient balance is it's not so much about what you're giving your body in that moment, but it also has a lot to do with how you're going to feel a couple of hours later and what choices you end up making. So all this is about better energy. And then we get to better performance. So I talk about better energy is the enabler of better performance, but one component of that is better frequency. And so the frequency is remembering to treat your body like a race car and remembering to treat your child's body, this is even more important, as a race car. Because what we want to do is we want to give them enough fuel for them to do a couple of laps, come back, and pit stop. Now, the issue can be that their schedules, I mean, some of these school schedules, I thought it was bad when we ate lunch at 11:15, but I've had kids who are eating lunch at 10:15, and then literally not having anything else until they're going home and getting home. And by the time with traffic and everything else, it's 3:30, 4. No wonder they're hangry, upset, feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, etc. So one of the things that we want to try to do is to get an understanding of what your kid's school schedule is, and then build out how your schedule can work around. If you guys have to get up, and many families do, at 4, 4:30, 5 a.m., and if the kids have to get up in that time period because they're getting dropped off at 7 a.m., I'm not going to be against them eating on their way or them having a little something, as long as that they're eating, maybe the first thing that they have is at 6:30 or 7, but what we need to do is make sure they have something at 10. And that usually does happen with most school schedules. On the weekend, it's a horse of a different color, especially as kids are a little bit older. They tend to not have anything all morning and then wake up around lunchtime, or what would be lunchtime, and then start going. So we'll talk about that part. But the key thing is to think about is we want to be able to enable these pit stops. And so if the reality of your child's life is that they are having lunch at 10:30, 11, then what we need to focus on is where are they going to be at 2 o'clock or 2:30? And one of the things I want each of you to do is to think about this for yourself, but also for your child. And we'll start with your child first, because that's everybody's natural inclination. So for your children, if they're going to a practice, whether that's band practice or that's debate practice or whether it's sports practice, you need to make sure that there is snack time built into that. Now, they're probably just like us. Who likes to eat something substantive and then go run around the track or go play their trumpet? I'll tell you, I do not like to. So a lot of times what I'll do in that space is pack a coconut water, which is also hydrating, or maybe I'll pack a little smoothie and I put it in one of those, I love my New Wave Enviro containers, and I'll pack it in there, which keeps it cold, and I do it as a non-dairy option, so nothing's bad. And I'll have that smoothie, or I'll do a trail mix. And the trail mix, especially if it's going to be something, and I have a recipe on my site for a trail mix that I've created that I love, and it's just super easy on that part. So we won't. Now, those are the kids. Now you need to think about yourself. A lot of what's happening in that time period is you may have had something at 10 or 11, and now you're either at work or you're out doing errands or you're doing a combination of both of those, and now it's time to go pick them up. And you're thinking, oh, let me just go pick them up and then let me get home and then I'll make everyone a snack, or we'll all get a snack. And you are setting yourself up for personal failure in terms of better choices. So it's so important for you to be thinking about pit stopping for your own snack during the day, or it can be a snack meal. I use the term nutrition pit stop, but that's going to be really critical for you, for your energy, especially for allowing you to make better choices for yourself, but also enabling you to make better choices so that you are making the kind of choices that will impact having your kids have better choices too. So better foundations, I want to come back to what goes in and on our kids' bodies. And the one thing that I hope they're doing most days, I don't care if they're washing their hair and conditioning it, but I definitely care if they're washing. And so what I want to focus on, here's one of my favorites. The kids loved it because the colors, I just got these for my niece and nephew, and I took them home with them. They thought it was the greatest gift for back to school. And it's theirs, and I gave each one of them their own. I also gave them their own sunscreen and told them that we have sun all year long. It's not just about the summer, and they have the sun stick. So when they're going to soccer practice or whatever, it's important to apply it. And we want to make sure that what's going in their bodies is going to be as good as what is going in from what's going on their bodies is going to be as good as what's going in. And then also when it comes to the nutrition from supplements, I am a believer in supplements for kids. I think it is really hard, just like it is for us for adults to get our foundational nutrition in every day and to do it healthfully. So to get enough vitamin D for kids, they need to drink 4 to 6 glasses of milk, and I have no interest in that for any child. So I think that's not even, from a vitamin D standpoint, we'll probably get into that discussion with Judy. But anyway, it's really important, but the quality of the supplement is going to matter so much. And so I've got some examples and resources like my Natural Vitality. This is actually a liquid one that you can just throw into a smoothie, or they can throw back in the day and get that one in with great organic nutrients. Okay, so in order to talk about better focus, Judy, I wanted to bring you into the conversation now. Gosh, I loved reading your bio, and I was like, God, working on a farm and working in resources on Hawaii, you must have really, we think of that sounds like the dreamiest situation, but then I know I've traveled to Hawaii, and I actually have done a couple of nutrition classes there, and I remember it was actually kind of difficult for people to get fruits and vegetables in. So I'm curious about that part, and then I have some key questions that I wanted to ask you about focus. But tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Sure. So, my goodness, yeah, I've been a dietitian a long time, and I'm a mom too, and did some of my training in Hawaii. My graduate work was there, and then I just lived there for a few years because it's so delightful to be there. But and worked there. And it wasn't until I became a mom that my path really got pulled into working with kids, because there were a lot of surprises with my own son and questions that his pediatricians just really couldn't answer. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I truly, even though I was a dietitian, I was trained, and I'd worked in WIC. My master's degree was a public health training, so I'd done a lot of varied training in varied settings. I truly didn't understand that pediatricians really don't get trained in nutrition very thoroughly. They're busy. They are very busy. They do other things, but if you really have some kind of inscrutable problems with kids feeding, growing, functioning, you might need to go a little further. And that was my eye opener, and that's what pulled me into this niche of practice, which I've done now for almost 20 years. So here I am.
Really, such a good point on that part, and I think that there's something where, for parents, there's a fine line where we don't want to be disrespectful or teach our children to be disrespectful to medical practitioners, in particular their doctor. And we also want answers, right? And on the flip side, and so I grew up, my dad's a pediatric surgeon, a pediatric urologist, and he was the first to say, like, I have no idea about this. He's like, I'm pretty sure that if kids ate more fiber and were at healthier weights, I wouldn't have to operate. But other than that, I don't have the tools. And I think that's a hard place for a physician to be in, which is to say that they don't know, right? Or I'm not sure. And so I think sometimes their reaction is actually one, and it's all of us try to be our best selves as practitioners, where it's actually because it's hard to say I don't know, or I'm not going to be able to figure that information out. So what I like to say about dietitians, and it sounds like you fit right into this spot, is I like to call us the chief implementation officer. So I'm like, we're the CEO
Right.
of your medical system, right? And so our job is to implement, is to help you actually do the things that your doctors have discussed, or to teach you and then talk to them about that part. And so I think that'll be something that we go through as we talk about it. So I wanted to, in thinking about that, we're going to go through, I'm going to ask you some questions, and with your answers, I think what is really helpful for the listener is for them to understand that one of the best things that you can do is A, the food journal that we were talking about. You have to have actual information. B, recognize that you are the person, other than the child themselves, that is around the child most often. And so keeping a food mood journal, or writing down how they feel, or things that you visually see. And I keep emphasizing writing it down. I am the queen of the workbook or the journal, because too often we think that we will remember something, and we go into the doctor's office, and maybe there was like bad traffic or something happened on the way, and it's just like it erases. Like, I know I can't even report what I had to eat that day. That's why I always write it down. So I think that that'll be, those are some things that'll be helpful. So anyway, without any further ado, let's go into first and foremost. Let's think about the nutrients, the key nutrients that you would talk about as it relates to attention, focus, sort of having that better energy that we were discussing, that kids should and families should try to consume on a daily basis. And
Right, yeah.
Nutrients or foods, yeah, or both.
Right, this is a great start, and totally agree about those food journals. Bring those in, they help so much, and it's the last thing parents want to do, because it's a pain to write it all down. But without it, we really can't help you as much as we could. And when people write it down, they discover that it's not about judging the parent, and a lot of parents get stuck with that. It's not about you, it's about your kid and just helping your kid. So that's where I can really see what nutrients are kind of popping out of the picture. And for ADHD, for attention and learning issues, I would say the most common finding on those journals in general is just that these are kids who often, believe it or not, tend to not quite eat enough food. So exactly what you were saying earlier, Ashley, about getting food throughout the day. Kids are growing, their brains are growing. They have to get stuff throughout the day. And you hit the nail on the head when you said they go for hours and hours and they can't focus, they can't function in school very well that way. So that is key. And look at that for your kids. Number one, that journal will be really helpful in illuminating that for you. Like, wow, my kid went for 7 hours and had no food. And the other thing that will really help you with that, if you're coming to talk to me about your child, is looking at their growth pattern. If you have a child who's on the thin side, a lot of the kids I work with are, because I do work with a lot of kids with all kinds of kind of heavy furniture for issues and stuff. If they're a little bit underweight, just that alone, that is all by itself enough to impede attention and focus, believe it or not. And this is not something your pediatrician will necessarily notice. They tend to not be concerned until kids fall below that 5th percentile. But what I notice is you can see in growth patterns if you look at them in more detail, and this is another thing your pediatrician may not have time to do. So you can see if there's just a daily, even if it's not very big, calorie or protein deficit, and it's just kind of always eating away at your child's functional ability. And that food journal and that growth chart will really help me see that. You don't need to be doing any special labs. So as to answer your question, number one, literally, are they getting enough food? It's so simple, it's almost exasperating. But it's right?
Like they're so, you're right, there's almost a numbness because pediatricians are dealing, in their offices are dealing so much with overweight and obesity that the underweight often they're like high five, like good, check the box, we don't have to deal with overweight or obesity, but maybe not paying attention. So let's think a little bit about the foods then. One of the questions that parents often ask me about, and this one, you can tell where the marketing has been, but it's about fats and needing to get fats in. And the interesting thing is I have parents who don't want to give their kids saturated fat, right? So the heart disease message has gotten in there. And one of the things that I spend time explaining is like, so all foods have different types of fats in them, but there are different kinds of saturated fats. I'd love for you to talk for a minute about the role of fats as it relates to focus and attention.
Yes, brilliant. I love fats. And so our brains are about 60% fat, and kids' brains are growing. I just have so much respect for children, especially children with special needs, because they're working so hard every day to overcome and fit in and keep up. And fats are huge for that. They need healthy fats. I am totally on board with saturated fats if they're, like you said earlier, non-GMO. I'm okay with animal fats. I am definitely on board with these being, if you can afford it, when you can afford it, organic, non-GMO fats. They're brilliant sources of a lot of good things for your child's brain. Also fats from nuts, seeds. I love pumpkin seeds. One nutrient I just got to throw in here is iron, and we can talk a little more about that. Very, very critical for attention, focus, learning, especially math. That's what's interesting about iron. But back to fats, yes, very important. I'm very much on board with the coconut oil, coconut fats that are not sweetened, not hydrogenated. And with, of course, omega-3 fatty acids. What I find a lot of parents do is they buy supplements for that. These are fish oil supplements, but they're not really doing anything because they're using really low doses. And this is the kind of thing that I can help families discern, or someone like you, Ashley. This is not the kind of thing your pediatrician may have time to know. But depending on your kids, if they're dealing with a learning issue, certain of those omega-3 fatty acids have very specific jobs in the brain. So for kids who are struggling with visual tracking, their eyes getting all the way across the page when they write or read, focus attention, dyslexia, it's the DHA, the docosahexaenoic acid, big word. The DHA part of that fatty acid, that fish oil, that is the money part of that. And those are kids who need at least 400 to 800 milligrams of that a day. And a lot of parents are buying these supplements where there's like 100 milligrams, and they're mostly sugar. They're mostly like a chewable candy, and there's very little omega-3 in it, and it's just not even worth it. And in fact, it's probably hurting more than it's helping. it's so sugary. It's just candy. So little things like that. I've had parents say to me, oh, we tried fish oils, it didn't do any good. You need to use the right dose, and that does need some individual assessment usually in the picture of your child's total diet, what else is going on. And you need to use it long enough, because these fats are going to repopulate cell membranes in your child's brain and literally make them so they move and function better when they're trying to get neurotransmitters across into them. So fats are big, and I'm definitely finding when I do food intakes and I get those beautiful food records that people write for us, I often do see their fat intakes are really low. They're maybe 30 grams a day. I want to see these kids eating 40, 50, 60 grams a day of really nice fat.
That's awesome. And it is interesting. So I often struggle, I think your point about the essential fatty acids, where you're getting them in. I mean, I love getting them in from a food standpoint. And with the supplements, a lot of times there are ways that we can bring it in through the food source also. And I always I go back to that initial slide that I had that's like reminding us too that what's good for the gander is good for the goose, because a lot of times too I'll see adults that are maybe higher up on their fat intake than the child, but they're not higher up on the overall quality of the fat intake. And so I think your key point in there is also that when we're talking about dosing something for a specific health outcome, especially to replenish brain cells, et cetera, that is really something that should be done. That's why we're the CIOs, because we're going to look at your total nutrition and look at not just how much you're getting in, but when you can get it in, and give you ideas for getting it in throughout the day, so you don't have to just use sugar as a vehicle. So I love that part. So the other side of this is it can be so hard so there are days that are quote unquote better, but then there are days where life just happens, right? And I think that one of the things that I think is the greatest challenge about this particular time of year, and there are a couple of others that get thrown at us, is really for parents and kids to feel like they have solutions that can work in that moment. So I will give you two of mine, and then I'm really curious about what ones you have that you've seen in your, either with yourself and your son, or in practice. So for me, I've mentioned before about my Natural Calm magnesium. The running joke in my world is that if you can't find me, I'm likely in a calm bath, a magnesium bath, sipping my Natural Calm, and when I get out, I'm going to apply a little bit more of my Calm cream to the tough spots, the spots that need some TLC. And I think it's so important to understand that magnesium, especially supplemental magnesium of a high quality, so it's magnesium citrate in a liquid or a topical form, it goes into the body and it turns down that fight or flight response that is triggering stress, or that is the stress response, and that is also creating in that stress response that contraction or that tightness. So that is one of my go-tos when stress, when moodiness hits. And sometimes before I can make dinner for someone or be nice to others, I have to, I jump in with that, and that might even be something that I do at work. And another one for me are some of the homeopathic remedies. So for example, when I moved to DC, I never had allergies, and I got allergies, and I didn't realize how much they were draining my energy. I wasn't sick, but I felt almost sick almost all the time. And I think that was a really big one for me. And when I use the brand Byron, I think there are some others that people like, and I use the histamine just to make sure that I can have a clear head. But what I like about that is it's not interacting, the way homeopathy works is it's not interacting negatively with other medications or with other things, my nutrition or any of the other pieces. So what are a couple of yours?
Right. Oh my gosh, there is a whole universe of these tools, and I love that there is. I think because I work so often with kids who are struggling with anxiety, ADHD, autism, and things where they're often given psychiatric meds because, maybe these providers, it's not their universe to use these other tools. I love homeopathic. From the world of supplements, one of the easiest things to do for these kids is to use free amino acids, basically. You can, or a very good hypoallergenic protein like a collagen. You can buy organic grass-fed collagen powder now. I work with many kids who have big food sensitivities or allergies. Once you restore the brain with enough of these amino acids that are supposed to be around so they can make neurotransmitters that calm themselves, with magnesium, that is a win-win. I love magnesium, and you're so right about that. And you can combine that with a good hit, if you will, like a scoopful. There's a number of brands of just free amino acids, and what those are, for everyone listening, those are what proteins are made of. And of course, when you eat a protein, your gut's supposed to pull that all apart and then send the individual. It's like if you think of a pearl necklace all knotted up in a ball, and your stomach opens up that necklace into like a long rope, and then your digestion pulls off each pearl, and each pearl could be an amino acid, and then you put those back together into the little structures you need in the brain. If you just feed those to kids who maybe they have gut issues, they don't break things down, or allergies, or they just don't eat enough, or it's hard for them to eat enough, so calming. That can be very calming and organizing right there, right away. They work very quickly. And that is the kind of thing, again, you probably want, especially if your child is using some kind of especially like an SSRI or something, definitely get help with that, because you don't want any interactions with that stuff. But there are so many tools like that. I love giving that. Probably one of my other favorites is you can work pretty quickly with kids' intestinal environments, their gut biomes. Really great tools are available there, and there's certain ways to use probiotics or herbs to kind of balance that picture so that they immediately feel calmer. It's amazing that this is so connected. We're all learning about this whole gut-brain link and how what's going on in the gut impacts what's going on in the brain very quickly, very directly. So there's so much room there to help out. There's so many great tools there.
I love that. So it's like our brains are connected. So first of all, I love this because as you were talking about the aminos, I was like, we have to remind people. I always use this expression: "You are not what you eat; you are what you digest and absorb." And so if the digestion isn't and we should add eliminate. And so if that stuff isn't happening, and so often especially it's a good reminder in the back to school time period that, like many of us as adults, we don't like to necessarily just go to the bathroom, especially if it's number 2, just anywhere. We might like to just do that at home. And so I've had kids where that actually is ultimately the issue, that they're not eating their lunch because they don't want to go to the bathroom at school. So I think the digestive part is really an important one to unpack. But the other part about the aminos that I really love, and it kind of carries over from the fat conversation, is what we're really talking about here and what you've identified are tools that are part of the building blocks, giving the body the resources, the building blocks that it needs to perform properly. So if I go back to that pit stop analogy, what we're talking about is, you need gas in the tank, you need oil in the engine. I'm about to prove that not only do I not have a car, but I don't really know how cars work. But you need windshield wiper fluid, and you need to have, your car can't be so dirty on the windshield that you can't see through it. And there are many other small things about the car that we need to have working. And I think that that's such a critical piece that an assessment with someone like yourself can really help understand. It's kind of it's not even in the fine tuning, but it's in that performance space. So I think that part is so key. We would be remiss if we didn't, Judy, mention that, of course, everything we're mentioning also works for the parents. So we need to talk. So I wanted to conclude this Q&A section, then we'll move into the other Q&A, or the overall, where we invite our guests to ask us questions. But I wanted to ask, I don't want to belabor it, because what I don't think is appropriate, it's not a belaboring. What you and I don't do is go out there and say, if you are on this medication, here's what you should do. Medication is part of a personal prescription, which I think both of us believe nutrition should be. But what if your kids are taking medication for focus, for attention? Are there things that you should be particularly careful of from a nutrition standpoint? We've heard about sugar, we've heard about caffeine, we've heard about herbs. How are these the things to pay attention to? Or are there others that you've seen are either really big problem potentials, or on the flip side, are there things that can be really big opportunities?
Right. Okay. So problems, if your kid's on an SSRI, don't use tryptophan, don't use 5-HTP, don't use any of these amino acid tools without some guidance, because there can be an interaction there that will maybe enhance the medication, and then you have a child that has a paradoxical reaction often, where they're more anxious and more upset. So those are something to be careful with. Opportunity, often what I find is what's driving a child's ADHD or even anxiety or some of what are called autism features can be nutrition problems that are unresolved. And a really big opportunity there is iron. And this is what I want everyone to do. If you have your child medicated right now for anxiety, depression, attention focus, at your school physical or next time you go, you've got to ask your pediatrician to do an iron assessment. And I can leave Ashley with what goes into that. It's not just a hemoglobin. Iron is so critical for all of those things, for focus, attention, paying attention, for sleep, sleeping through the night. If you have a child who's kind of moving all over the bed all night or gets up a lot at night, there's a lot of clinical signs that go with this. It doesn't mean they're necessarily anemic. Kids can have kind of marginal iron for a long time before they may or may not ever become anemic, but this can still really impact them for learning. So if you're using medication, you'll want to know if that's in the mix, because a medication can't fix that. That's only a nutrition issue, but it often does not get assessed. People tend to just assume this doesn't happen, but it's really common. So get that checked out for sure, because you might find that that alone, and you need guidance with how to replenish a child for iron if you find a problem, get help with that. And the really big money part of that is ferritin. Think of the animal a ferret with "in" on the end, ferritin. Reference ranges for that are big, but I'll just throw out that kids function best, in my experience over many years looking at these labs, when their ferritin levels are more like 40. The reference range goes down to like 6. If your kids is below 20 or 30 and they have attention issues, they're going to be able to pay attention better when their ferritin is restored. I can almost guarantee that, and we're never supposed to guarantee anything, but that is one thing that is definitely important. So that's an opportunity for sure.
I love that. And what I would say is almost all of this up until now, actually all of this up until now, we've been saying, oh, goose, gander, goose, et cetera. We have to be really careful with iron
Right.
for in women after perimenopause and through, and as well as in adult men, and that's really after your growth spurt has sort of ended. And so, that's going to be a key one. And with any iron supplementation, I think it's an important part to have that tracked with your physician and your dietitian. So
Definitely.
Very cool. Okay, so let's move through. I just thought I would recap and go over what we all need. We need better school supplies. So we can go from the bottom up, better equipment and containers. This may be, remember what you're putting your kids' food in, what you're putting your supplements in, what you're carrying your stuff in. One of the ones that I really focus on I love that we've moved over to the space of using less plastic bags, but you really do need to make sure that the bags that you're carrying, especially food, or even a lot of times with the kids' backpacks, or if you're putting food into like the groceries into carry bags, you want to make sure that you're washing those out, or you're just recycling those into the universe appropriately if they're dirty. We talked about skincare, supplements with our skincare with our foundations, and then better supplemental food. I can't emphasize this enough. Supplements are phenomenal, but they need to be at least as good quality as the food as your daily food choices. And the other part about this, remember, this whole thing, your food and your supplemental food, is going to be your total nutrition. And what we want to remember is that your supplements are typically a much better choice than lesser quality food that is fortified with poor quality supplements. So let me repeat that again. Adding a supplement with food that is good quality and it's minimally processed, hopefully in a whole food form, is going to be more ideal for you than a food that has a bunch of fortified nutrients. So I have a lot of times I get people to tell me, oh, my kids are having the orange juice with the calcium, or they're getting their folic acid in their cereals and these sorts of things. But those are often foods that have been hyper-processed, stripped of those nutrients, and then because of regulations or choice or wanting to brag about something on the front of the package, they have ingredients added back to them. And that's something to be really careful about. We talked about probiotics, and there are very few foods, almost none, that have a probiotic added to them that I actually think are beneficial if you're trying to achieve beneficial results of probiotics. So important things to think about. I wanted to share some resources. These are some of my favorites, and I definitely went through many of these as we talked about it. So first of all, I have a bunch of pit stop ideas and recipes. I hope that you'll check those out. I also have the personal shoppers. If you're wondering about supplements, if you're wondering about what's a good choice for a chicken nugget or something else, go on there. I've been doing this for over 10 years and have evaluated over 50,000 products. It's just what I think. It's not, I used to say it's unbiased. It's totally biased. It's absolutely what I've been able to identify by asking questions, as well as by researching and getting to know the product. Some of my favorites from Nature's Path. I love these Kia bars. They're delicious, adults and kids. Hemp Heart Bites. There's also new Hemp Heart Toppers. We love carrots, but I love, they're so fun. I love when they're organic. We really want to make sure that we're paying attention. And then the quality of our, whether it's Planet Box or New Wave Enviro, or we've got to-go containers. I showed you the Ween Green before. Here are a couple of logos you can look for. NSF on supplements, USDA organic on many different things, food, supplements, just to make sure that we're trying to get better quality. In the supplement space, I really am a big fan of this one in particular, this Glutaclear, and also I put in the supplement space, so tea and coffee are not supplements, but they do contain, these ones from Brassica actually contain True Broc, which is it's the desired dose of what we call glucoraphanin, which is found in broccoli that helps with detoxification, and it's a great way to get it in there. I was mentioning before, so this is actually a Keurig coffee. You can make that coffee and throw it into your oatmeal at that time, or you can even do it the night before. You can throw the tea into your smoothie. You can have this tea at the office. Great options. And I always speak about my Natural Calm. I don't think I would be able to do what I do without my Natural Calm. So there are some resources. So Matt, I thought we'd turn it over and open it up to I know you're picking winners for the Nature's Path win, I guess, and which is awesome. And I wanted to see if people have questions for Judy and I, as well as invite you to. I want you to know that I have discovered through my dear friend Marcy Zaroff, who is just a phenomenal nutrition and health and lifestyle expert. I have really learned so much about all of the issues in our textile choices. And I used to think that we didn't have great options. We have phenomenal options. So I really hope that you will join us for this, because I think it's going to knock your socks off, pun intended, and have you put on better socks or sleep in better bedding and really enjoy it. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you with some questions. And Judy, just feel free to jump in with me as we answer them.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ashley and Judy. I'd like to just announce the winners. I'll be in contact with you via email to get your addresses to send you some Nature's Path goodies. So I will be contacting Diane Michael, Gabby Sipe, Gretchen Riddle, Lani Perez, and Mallory Blake. So congratulations to you all. We've received some questions. You've actually answered a couple of the questions after we received them, and seeing that we're on a little bit of a time-sensitive schedule right now, I think I'll ask this one. I think it's an important question, and Ashley and Judy, if you can say a few things, that'll be great. So the question is, I like what you are saying, but I honestly feel like it's hopeless. The kids and I always gain weight at this time of the year through the holidays. There are all these birthday parties and play dates, and I just don't want to be the person who is always saying no. Do I have to be?
What do you think, Judy?
Well, yeah, this is a tough thing, and I so often work with families who need to restrict foods anyway because of allergies and stuff, and it's really, like you said earlier, parents are the ones in charge, and what you don't want to do is, to be honest, do not feel sorry for your children. Just quit it, because you're a wonderful parent to even be thinking about these things and thinking of their good health. And whatever you're comfortable doing and shouldering, they're going to be comfortable with it. So first and foremost, you kind of have to make peace with all this for your own self, and your kids will follow suit. I know that might not be exactly the answer, easy to hear, but that's truly the way it goes. I mean, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of families with incredible problems their kids have with feeding and eating and allergies and food restrictions and difficulty, and it's the families that really see their kids through to better, like you're talking about earlier, and feeling more well, are the parents who kind of chuck all the guilt and chuck all the worry and just say, well, this is how we're going to do it. And then they find other ways to enjoy if you're not going to be doing it with food. And I'll also say really quickly, when I first began this journey in the mid-90s with my son, there was no gluten-free anything, and he had a lot of issues with that. I was the most unpopular person at any family gathering, and I just learned to cook for quantity. I didn't ever say a word. I never asked people to bring special food or this or that for my son. I just shut up and showed up, and I would bring a ton of food for everybody. I know we don't always all have time for that. The good thing now is there's so much of this stuff available, and there really are many, many ways to enjoy without having to kind of lapse into foods that you know probably aren't going to work well for your family. And then again, back to that, I know one of the favorite things is that 80-20 rule. If you're doing really well with it most of the time, enjoy the transgressions, if you will, now and then, not a big deal. That's basically my spin on that.
Yeah, I love it. I just totally echo that. I think hopeless is it's a word that makes me really, I think we're all in this together emotionally. So the first thing is know that we are actually all in this. There are so many people. On my podcast, Take Out with Ashley and Robin O'Brien has been on the front lines of dealing with this with her kids, with allergy kids, and but in particular recent with this EpiPen situation. And we were talking about it, and we just need to know that we're all there for each other. So I think that that's probably the first space. The second space is I want to be careful about linking weight and health. And, one of the things, like gaining weight sometimes, and in fact, as it relates to what Judy was talking about, your child may need to gain some weight. But if part of why you may gain weight during this time period may be that it feels overwhelming, and that's often because we don't give ourselves credit for what we're actually doing right and doing well. And so I challenge you in that space to look at those things that you are able to make time for, that you do well, that you do feel good about. A, remember them, but B, think a little bit about how you make those happen. And I think there might be some insights there into how you can make some of these other pieces happen. And then the final piece is, Judy and I are CIOs for a reason. There is nothing wrong with needing help from others, and especially needing and valuing the professional help. And I tell my patients, this is hard stuff. And it is really hard no matter what you're dealing with. It is really hard, especially in the beginning, because the way that our brains are put together is it can take a really long time to create a new habit to replace an old habit. And that's really the only way that it's not about breaking or getting rid of a habit. The good thing for your kids is that if you can work with them now and create some of these better habits, they are not going to have to do what you're having to do later on in life. So I think there's a real gain to that. Great question, Matt, and thanks for sharing it.
Yep, of course. Thank you very much. So if anyone wants to watch this webinar, like I said earlier, it'll be on Ashley's Facebook and YouTube within a week. Please join us for our next webinar, Better Clothing and Bedding, on September the 15th. And Judy, once again, thank you so much for joining us today on the webinar.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
I just love to, Judy, can you give a shout out to where people can also find you? I think you're on Facebook. Is that probably the best spot if they're looking for some of your...
Sure. Yes. My website is nutritioncare.net. And there's also a Facebook page, Nutrition Care Facebook page. And you can reach me through that website, through that page. There's a recipe archive up there. There's all kinds of stuff up on my website. So would love to hear from you folks.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Judy. And everyone, hope to see you next month for Bedding, Clothing and Bedding. Thanks then.